Okay, what I want to do in this video is just to cut back a bit to some of the material I was talking about a few days ago, uh, trying to articulate some of the relationships between the kind of structure of the brain, the sensory motor system, the action representations, motor cognition, that whole process in which the material substance of the evolved brain forms ultimately gives rise to experience. I want to try and draw a line between that and what I was talking about in the previous video to do with matter, and how matter, the substance of the world as it appears to the sensory motor system, is a kind of poetic rendition of those sensory motor responses. And then I want to take it one stage further to talk about some partly speculative ideas to do with how that process extends into the development of metaphors. Metaphors for things, ideas and concepts which would otherwise be abstract, including possibly metaphors for things that don't actually exist at all, in any, not just in a material sense or even in an abstract sense, but which are perhaps well, I'll deal with that when I get to it, if I can get to that. But I want to start off with a quotation. I'm not going to be reading this, so it'll be a bit halting, I'm afraid. But I just want to start off with this quotation from Deepak Chopra. And I'm not holding Deepak Chopra up as an authoritative source. I just think this is an interesting line, which has a lot of mileage in it, although I don't think it's the same mileage that Deepak Chopra intended. It's in a book called How to Know God, and he says this. He says, "The same brain responses that enable you to see a tree as a tree, instead of a ghostly swarm of buzzing atoms, also enable you to experience God." Okay, so the same brain responses that allow you to see a tree, and I'm looking at a tree in my garden, this tall silver birch tree, and I have a kind of transparent relationship to my perception in that regard. It's an unproblematic experience for me to see the tree. I don't have to engage in any complex cognitive work apparently to do that. I mean, I know I do really, but it doesn't feel like I'm engaging in any kind of cognitive work. I just simply see the tree as the tree. It appears unproblematically on the theatre of my senses, so to speak. And there is undoubtedly a set of responses going on there. And Deepak Chopra says that the same brain responses that are doing that are allowing me to unproblematically witness the tree as an entity, as a material entity in my world, also, he says, enable me to see God. There are some problems with that, so I'm going to just track it through and see if I can identify the kind of wisdom or the interesting insights that lie behind that, but also some of the problems. Certainly what I'm taking from that is that there undoubtedly is what he calls brain responses. They are sensory motor somatosensory systems, primarily visual systems in this particular case, which are rendering certain experience at certain kind of functions, operations in this local area of the universe, rendering those operations as a visualizable object in my phenomenal experience. There are perturbations in the electric field. Richard Feynman talks about this very beautifully, actually, in a lecture that he gives called The Pleasures of Finding Things Out, where he talks about these ripples of light coming through this little tiny 1/8 of an inch hole in your eyeball, your pupil, and that tiny little ripple of light is sufficient to give rise to the immense complexity of the visualizable world around you. So that's undoubtedly what's happening, but all of that is constructed, but not constructed in the sense that you would construct something artificial. It's constructed as it is, as a fully real, material, physical experience by my sensory motor engagement. But what's being implied in Chopra, and what's implied elsewhere in ideas to do with how conceptual metaphors work, is that those same mechanisms, probably that same pieces of the same hardware, if you like, some of the same brain circuits, I guess, but certainly some of the same cognitive processes will be mobilized for other kinds of constructions. So I'm seeing the tree as a tree, but also when I think about my family, for example, and I think about my family history, I think about my mum, who's in hospital right now, but she's getting a little bit better. And when I think about my dad and my grandma and my granddad, and I think about my brothers and sisters, one of the ways I think about them, of course, is a tree. It's a family tree. So I'm seeing my family as a tree, presumably using at least some of the same cognitive processes that I see a tree as a tree. I see my family as a tree, I see a tree as a tree. So all those kind of cladistic structures, those structures which use tree-like branching systems, like, I can't even talk about it without using the language of this tree metaphor, branching, to do with evolutionary history, to do with the way that taxonomic systems work in libraries, to do with how flowcharts work, all these kinds of other imaginary entities. I see them as trees, presumably, using, as Chopra says, the same brain responses that enabled me to see a tree as a tree. So I'm deploying existing hardware for the hardware designed to allow me to engage in the physically material world, using that same hardware and software to operate in this metaphorical world of imaginary trees and metaphorical branching systems. Now, where I part company with, I think I part company with Chopra, I'm not absolutely sure actually. He says it also, that's the same mechanism, it's allow you to experience God. Okay, so what he's saying there, I think what's happening there is that he doesn't intend it this way, I'm sure, but I think there is an inherent warning there. I think one reading of that could be that those same mechanisms also lead to mirages, presumably the same kinds of brain responses, the same kind of sensory motor cognitive systems which allow me to see real oases in a desert, would also allow me to fictionalize or dramatize my own needs as a mirage. So there's no guarantee that the thing you are seeing at the end of that metaphorical viewing process, whether it be a mirage or whether it be God, has actually any reality in any meaningful sense. But of course, maybe reality isn't the point. Maybe use function is more important. Okay, that's where I'll leave that. Thanks very much.